Feel free to have it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Positive Parenting. I'm Deanne Conrad, Community Relations Supervisor for the Sioux Falls School District. We thank you for joining us on Positive Parenting. This is a joint venture between the medical and child development professionals at Sanford Health and of course our education professionals from the Sioux Falls School District. We thank you for joining us today as we discuss the topic of teen drug use, alcohol use, and how prevalent that is in our community, and also some resources that are available for parents who might be facing this issue with their child, and trying to find those resources that are really going to work to get things back on the right track. So we hope that this half hour is filled with information that is useful to you. We have our guests here joining us today, and we thank you for joining us. Kathy, I'm going to have you introduce yourself, and then Jamie, and we'll get started.
Okay, I'm Kathy Lemmy, and I work at Sanford Health Psychiatry and Psychology Clinic, and I do individual, family, and couples counseling with or without addictions, and I also do court-approved chemical dependency evaluations, so I kind of do everything.
Across the gamut,
Yeah.
yes. Well, I'm sure you'll be a wealth of knowledge for us here today, Kathy. Thanks for joining us. Jamie.
I'm Jamie Nold, the Assistant Superintendent with the Sioux Falls School District, and serving in the first year of that after serving as a building principal for the past 10 years.
So you definitely have a perspective of working directly with teens.
Absolutely.
In our school system. And Kathy, how much of your time is spent with teens?
Well, as far as percentage-wise, I guess I've worked in a lot of different jobs over the years, and for right now, maybe a fourth of the
Sure.
time is spent with teens.
Sure. And you talk about family. You do family counseling as well. So of course that could be anywhere from very young children up to the teenage years as well. What are we seeing in terms of drug use in our community? Of course, we'd all like to believe we live in this very safe and happy community, which Sioux Falls is generally. But even in wonderful communities like Sioux Falls, there are challenges that communities face, and drug concern is obviously one of those. What are you seeing? I know you've been in the practice for many years, and what are you seeing over time? Are we having, is this a bigger issue than it was, or are we just more aware of things?
Well, I think we're more aware of things, but also within the past 5 years, alcohol and cigarette smoking has gone down. Prescription drugs has pretty much stayed the same, and cannabis abuse has just skyrocketed. I mean, people come in, and I mean, pot is just, you know,
So
everyday
right.
thing because, you know, it's getting legalized in states, and so it's no big deal unless you have to get random testing for your employment. Otherwise, you know, people just don't care. They just smoke pot.
So that's do you see that as a difference from years past?
Oh
that
yeah.
we've seen?
Well, you know, in the 60s and 70s it was kind of in.
Sure.
Then it went out again, and now there's just, you know, prevalent use of smoking marijuana, pot, weed, cannabis, whatever you want to call it.
Sure. Probably some cyclical things happen there too. It seems like maybe alcohol use was, you know, higher, and that seems to be going down and that type of thing. I know, you know, in my formative years, I had never seen drugs before in the drug form until in college, and then when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, get me out of here. But I grew up in a community where it just wasn't readily available, and I think now the swing seems to be that there may be more availability of the drugs out there too.
Yes, I mean, if a child wants to get drugs, they'll just go on the street and buy it, or take, prescription drugs from grandma who had a tooth pulled and didn't take all her hydrocodone or whatever, so they can get it anywhere.
Sure. And Jamie, as someone that's worked directly with teens, and obviously there are consequences in terms of drug use, and you've seen some of that come through the doors at our schools where they've used prior to coming to school, and then they show up there. What did you see in most recent years?
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly that the increase in use of marijuana has been a definite concern. And part of that is that it's just nationally so accepted now that I think a lot of our youth see that as not a big deal. But we see that in a lot of ways as the gateway to other drugs. And so we have seen that increase and how it impacts the students in the schools, the academics piece of that. Because if they're addicted to something, it's definitely going to impact other areas of their life. So we have seen that increase in the schools, and the consequences that happen with that. One, the natural consequence of the academic piece of that when they get addicted to something, but also there's legal consequences that come into play, and the school consequences as far as if they're under the influence, maybe at some events, or they're trying to participate in events at the school. If they're caught being under the influence or in possession of or something in our community, they forfeit some of those rights of being able to be involved in activities in the school. So no question I've seen over the years the individuals that have been impacted negatively by the use of marijuana. As far as the prescription drugs and things, I agree, a lot of times it's where they may pick it up from a parent. And more often than not, that's where we're going to see that from, is they may pick it up from a parent or a grandparent or relative of some type, and may just try that out to see what it's like. But then eventually it becomes a much bigger issue for them.
In terms of, I know a couple of years ago it seemed like and it was a very scary situation, and maybe still happening today, but you don't hear about it as much as like those, I want to say bath salts, is that the right term? Or is that what it was called? I mean, it was like those things used for one purpose, but then people were smoking them or burning them.
When someone becomes addicted, we've seen that in so many different formats of how they may turn to other common household products, or they turn to other things that they've heard may give them some type of a high, but usually at that point in time they've gone well beyond the addiction of marijuana or of other things, where they're trying anything they can because cost prohibitive in a lot of ways that they just can't afford maybe some of the things that they would like to, but they find a way to be able to get to it, and obviously that has a very negative impact on their health and well-being. So much that the parents play a big role in helping us out in the schools or the community. But we do see teens turn to other type of things when they don't get that fix or high.
In terms of like addictions and the formation of addictions, you hear people talk about addictive personalities. I'm addicted to one thing or another, or what have you. What causes that, or what are the signs and symptoms to recognize if someone has an addictive personality?
Well, the thing is a lot of it is hereditary. If, mom or dad or grandma, grandpa, this is what I hear a lot is, the medical history, the mental health issues and drug, alcohol history. There is a lot of, as far as hereditary, inherited addictions, but also its environment too. If you grow up in an environment where people are drinking, smoking pot, taking drugs, it's just your norm. So
becomes a passed down, a challenge that's passed down over time. What are some warning signs or things that you've seen in terms of behaviors of people who were perfectly on the right track, and then all of a sudden things started veering off the wrong direction?
Well, children can disappear. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone these days. And you can get a hold of your child, supposedly, and they might disappear for periods of time, get new friends, different friends. You should meet the parents of their new friends. changes in behavior, attitudes, if they have suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, or just erratic behaviors, that type of thing. I don't know if you could add.
And I agree with you had mentioned earlier the mental health piece of it, and a lot of times they may turn to some type of a drug or marijuana, whatever it may be, to compensate for some of those things because of the way they feel, instead of getting the appropriate help that they may need. Our school counselors tried to intervene in that and make sure that they refer those individuals to different community-based services. But a lot of times what they'll see, our teachers or our staff will see just in the change in the academics, change in attendance behaviors, where they may not be attending the way they should be. A change in friends is obviously a key piece too, but a lot of times parents will see that far earlier than maybe the school will, just because of knowing those friends coming by the house or what their tendencies may be. But I agree, there's a lot of fairly significant changes and subtle changes as well that happen. But a lot of times our teachers, our staff will refer that to a counselor. We try to help parents see some of those things. But parents are the biggest key to that whole part. When they see those changes, to be contacting the school, and the school will help them to set up some of those different agencies or groups that they could go to.
Yeah.
I totally agree, because the parents are much more aware these days, I think, and teachers, and that's the main part, is parents and teachers to prevent alcohol, drug use, or substance abuse, or dependency, whatever the case may be. But that's the main central part of preventing substance abuse, is the parents and the schools and the teachers.
And a lot of times those parents are a little bit fearful. Well, it's just a period they're going through, it's just a time they're going through. But if you don't intervene at an early time stage, the longer you wait, the harder it is. And sometimes, talking to some of the parents, they just beat themselves up a little bit that, God, I should have seen this earlier, I should have done something earlier. And we just always encourage that if you do see something, it's better to intervene and talk and be open about it now than it is to wait and regret that later on.
Right.
To intervene at an early stage is so much easier than when there's a much more difficult situation to deal with, especially all of a sudden at some point in time it may become a legal matter or a legal issue.
Yes, and this is the truth. That's why I do court-approved chemical dependency evaluations, because kids get in trouble with the legal system, whether it's impaired driving or underage drinking or being intoxicated with drugs or substances.
Can you describe, what does that evaluation look like, or what does your work look like when you're called on by the court to help through these processes?
Well, basically, I get the child's age, history, parents, siblings, that type of thing. Then I get their drug history, how much and how often do you smoke pot? When did you start smoking pot or drinking? Every substance I go through with the child to make sure it's comprehensive. And then there's another aspect of this whole thing. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, do kids have anxiety, depression, other mental health disorders? Is that contributing to alcohol, drug abuse, or substance abuse? And then you get to where is the substance abuse causing the anxiety, the depression, or other more serious mental health issues?
Right. So that, I'm just picturing teens not really being forthright with the information. Is that difficult to sort
Not
of
just
crack
teens,
the code?
it can be adults too.
Sure.
So I have to take them at their word and take down the information, and that's all I have to go with. But with adults and children, we do SASE and MAS tests. MAS do measure alcoholic tendencies, and the MAS measures drug, alcohol use, and prescription drug use. So I use both those tools. So besides the self-reporting.
Sure. So those are tests or tools that you can use to get to the bottom of the root issue.
And there's a different one for adults than adolescents.
Okay, interesting. And in terms of that conversations that take place, I would say there's probably, if a parent is approaching a child, or if a counselor or a teacher is approaching a teenager, they're probably I mean, maybe they will be forthright
Yeah.
immediately, but that's a challenge.
Yeah, and it is very much so. We've had some that are just at that point that they do want help, and others have to be pushed into or coaxed into wanting to get that help. And either way, whatever way that comes, we still have to make sure that they get those help, those services that they need. And with the schools, we've had a great response from the community of just the community resources that are out there for parents to be able to help them. We don't necessarily have those things in the school, although some do come to the school to meet with individual students and help them. But really, a lot of the things with Prairie View Prevention, and we do a lot of our help and assistance there with our students and individuals, and that's supported through the city of Sioux Falls and the state. Lutheran Social Services and Southeastern Behavioral Health also have programming of some of the community-based programming that's been part of that Juvenile Justice Reinvestment Initiative.
Sure.
And so there's different things that they can help with there that have been. But there's just so many resources with both of our medical institutions in the city of Sioux Falls. There's so many resources there that can help a family, a parent. They just got to be willing to take that step forward. So a lot of times it's got to be the parent to take that first step, because the student's probably not gonna. They're in the middle of it, so they just can't see that they need the help that they maybe do.
So we've been talking a lot about marijuana because it's readily available, but some of the hardcore drugs are affecting our teens as well. South Dakota Kids Count is a statewide survey that's done, and it's done nationwide Kids Count, and then we can look at statistics from South Dakota specifically, and meth use, it appears, is up in South Dakota among teens, which that's a concern across the state and by the governor, as I said, and by the City of Sioux Falls Police Department and the County Sheriff's Department and such. Do you see more students getting into those types of hardcore drugs as well?
Well, not really the teens, as long as, as far as the self-reporting, a lot of adults do the meth, whether it's snorting or usually they go to injections. And then looking at household products, any aerosol can get a kid high. Whether it's deodorant, hairspray, that type of thing, nail polish, hair remover, fingernail polish remover. There's a lot of substances around the house, cooking spray that they can inhale or snort, gasoline, things like that.
So, and those things that are readily available, as you said, the cost or the street price of some of those drugs may be prohibitive among teens, but the statistics from that at least show that numbers are going up, and I think that should be a grave concern to us as well, is that those harder core drugs are available.
We have, it's not, the first drug of choice. The marijuana has been, and to keep in perspective, we got incredible kids in our buildings and things, but still those that are impacted by this, we need to address that and help them. But marijuana is the drug of choice still, and that still maintains that for that age group. But we do see a slight uptick also in the meth use, but especially in the adults, and that's where we still hold to the belief that if we can address the marijuana use at that early age, or the huffing with the different chemicals that way, because our officers, resource officers, have seen that with the huffing piece of it that'll happen. It does lead into that meth use or other drug use. We had some concerns with a few other drugs that were coming back that are much more expensive drugs, but that seems to have turned more to meth if they're going to turn to something other than marijuana. But it does impact them later on as they start to turn to meth in their older, after they're out of school, out of high school, and looking for other drugs to be able to use. Marijuana is just so easy to hide and get and use that way. So it's very important that a parent, if they recognize that or see that, they may come across something that just causes them concern, to find help. The schools, the resource officers, they're there to help without it having to be a legal issue.
So talk about that role of school resource officer and sort of some of the ways in which they've been able to assist in cases and things like this.
They've been a blessing to the Sioux Falls School District, no question about that, and I think much more so to our community, because they'll help with a lot of those situations at an earlier stage to try to help families realize that they may need some help with their son or daughter. And so they've met with families, met with the parents, met with the child, and said, you know what, here's some different services, here's some avenues you can go, here's some of the community-based things. And they help them to see that if you don't, it may eventually turn into a legal issue where it becomes that impaired driving, or situations where they're caught with possession or selling, dispensing, and more serious charges that can come from that. So they've been critical in helping to get individuals that help they need before they become a legal situation for them.
When you start working with a student, a teen, sort of what's the process? Is there, I mean, I think in terms of, you know, alcohol recovery, we hear the 12-step process and things like that. I mean, what's the process for moving someone from an addiction to, you know, more clarity in terms of their thinking? Obviously, I'm sure it's different with every single person, but is there sort of a roadmap of how that works?
Well, it's different for different people, because when they come in, I'll do the chemical dependency evaluation. I'll usually get the information from the parents and the child, or other people that know the child.
Sure.
HIPAA forms are signed.
Yes.
Whether it be grandma or grandpa or something
Right.
like that. You know, because some grandparents do have, you know, custody of
and
grandkids,
guardianship.
that kind of thing. And so I do that, and I offer them the peer support advocate that we also have at Sanford. She kind of navigates them somewhat through the process as far as groups, that kind of thing. But the deal is that I usually refer them to outpatient counseling, you know, least intrusive measures, and I can do counseling with them. Or if it's really severe, inpatient treatment. But it has to be the parent's choice,
Sure.
because they're minors.
Sure. So how young of kids have you seen or worked with?
Well, a lot of adults have said that they started like drinking, especially, I think the youngest was 6.
Oh my goodness. And that's not just a sip of something. This was...
Yeah, because it was in the home and it was allowed, which is kind of frightening. But one thing I do want to bring up is K2, or synthetic marijuana.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think that's what I was
It causes
thinking about.
hallucination, bizarre behaviors, violence, and the thing is it can't be detected in a normal UA. I have a friend that works in residential corrections, and people will come in just out of control, and they do the UA, and they can't detect it, but they know it's synthetic marijuana, or K2. So that's one really scary thing
Right.
floating
We've
around.
been very pleased that the courts have taken some action to try to curtail that and to stop that, because we did see some of that being used and utilized, and sometimes it's a little bit of a fad or push that happens through kids, where they, you know, hear about it from somebody else, they want to try that or something like that, and it is very detrimental. And I agree, there's a lot of difficulties in finding out. They know something's not right with the child, but they have a hard time figuring out what exactly it is, and we found out in some of those situations that it is that's K2, or the synthetic.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of earlier when I was talking about those
The bath
bath salts. Is
yeah.
the K2 is that. I mean, a couple of years ago, just some of the stories you heard of that erratic behavior, and I mean, it is frightening that those behaviors can turn extremely violent or just very unsafe. You know, for
And different substances can cause that also, ecstasy and LSD,
Sure.
and that kind of thing.
Sure.
Another thing I wanted to mention too is at Sanford, we do have psychologists if they need testing, further testing. And also we have psychiatrists, so if they have a neurochemical imbalance in their brain, then the doctor can treat that if that's what's kind of causing
them.
the substance abuse also. So sometimes that resolves the issue also. Another thing is a primary care physician to send them there for a UA, urinalysis, or blood testing, because then they can kind of determine what the child has been taken. But the kicker on that one is unless it's observed, the UA, they can sneak urine in too,
Sure.
and pour that in the cup.
Yeah.
So it does get kind of tricky at times.
Right.
And we've worked with, parents at different times, and it's been a great relationship with Sanford and other entities in Sioux Falls here where they're able to go and take their son or daughter. So we give them that information if they have concerns and say, you know what, you can go to Sanford and have a UA done, and they'll tell you that. And it's private. It's just for the parents to get that information, but it's so helpful. And some have come back and been very thankful of that because then they're able to have that conversation with their son or daughter. And you're right, they have to be aware of other things that can happen, but they've been great about helping us out. So there's so many resources in a community that we have like Sioux Falls that they can get that help right here.
Yeah, I think it's not a specific problem. It's not just a medical problem. It's not a school problem. It's not just a legal problem, but
Community.
Yeah, community-wide, something that we all need to, understand and accept the fact that it is happening. And if we turn our cheek to it, it's going to continue to happen in probably a broader scale than any of us realize. So we're coming up on the end of our time. Any final thoughts you want to share with parents about things that they should be looking for or resources available?
Yeah, and if there is a concern, contact the school. The counselor there will help greatly. Get them in contact with some of those community resources. Each situation is so different, and depending on what they have for insurance or not, lack of insurance, there's still that help there. So the resources are in our community, so they need to just make a contact and reach out, take that first step, and if they do that, there's help out there for them.
Very good. Kathy, any final thoughts from you of
Well,
what you
I
want
just-
parents to know?
Would like parents to know that they need to keep open communication with their children, and safety comes first. And if parents get into a situation where a child is like violent or out of control from substance abuse, then they need to call 911. If they're like comatose or having seizures, then they need to rush them or call an ambulance or that type of thing, or rush them to the hospital. So there are steps that parents need to know, how to deal with these situations.
Prior to the recovery part of the process,
Right.
taking care of the issue
Right.
of greatest concern first.
Yeah, and also homicidal ideation and suicidal ideation gets to be a real problem with children.
Well, definitely things for all of us to think about, whether we have the young children and they're observing behaviors that are happening with adults in the home, or whether it's the teens who, are in a home where things like that are not being used, but they're visiting, they're more mobile, they can go to other places, they have cars these days, that type of thing. It may not be happening in your home, but it may be available to them, in another location. So just staying on top of this issue is something that we all have to do, partner together to make sure that our kids remain safe. Thanks for joining us today on Positive Parenting.